Hello, everyone. Thank you to everyone in the audience, those watching on Twitter and YouTube and live stream sources everywhere. Welcome to our panel, The Rise of a New On-Chain Cultural Economy. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Valerie Whitaker. I work at a company called Trilitech, which is the London hub that supports adoption of the Tezos blockchain. And of course, thank you also to Art Basel, with whom we have partnered for this illustrious debut in Paris, which has been wonderful. And of course, my lovely panelists, who I'll let introduce themselves very briefly before we get into the conversation. Just a bit of background about myself. I joined the sort of Web3 on-chain cultural economy about 9 months ago. And prior to that was an art dealer for 15 years, focusing on photography specifically. And I came to this beautiful world of Web3 and blockchain technology, specifically looking for tools to help solve problems of authenticity in the space. But like many of you here, and I'm sure some of our panelists, just that one tiny question led to a rabbit hole of enthusiasm around what we will be speaking about today. So if I could ask each of you to introduce yourselves, and then we'll kick off.
Hi, thank you for receiving me. I am Ines Leonarduzzi. I am the president of an NGO called Digital for the Planet. And also I am the co-director of a Bureau of Strategy in art cultures.
Hi everyone, thank you very much. Thank you Tezos and all the Art Basel to just inviting me. I'm Jodouin Mitrani. I'm CEO and co-founder of Minted, and Minted is a platform, is a very end-to-end platform to help creators and artists to jump into the Web3 with very easy tools and sustainable technology, of course.
Hi everyone, I'm Frédéric Leify. I'm the founder of Art Consortium, and we bring tools to galleries and institutions to jump into the blockchain and share ownership.
Hi everyone, my name is Vincenzo De Bellis, and thank you Valerie, thank you Tezos. My role is Director of Fairs and Exhibition Platforms here at Art Basel, and looking forward to have this conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. So I guess the immediate first question is, what is an on-chain cultural economy? And I was going to launch into a cursory explanation from my experience, but actually, I'll confess, I sent around some questions to the panelists ahead of this talk. And Frédéric and Jodouin, you both came back with some very interesting responses on what you believe that to be, that I think make up part of the foundation of this conversation. So I'll pass that over to both of you.
Yes, actually, just let me tell you a quick stories about how I just realized that the creative industries and cultural industries was very complicated for the artists, and the digital was a tremendous opportunity for them to jump into a new field, meeting audiences in public. But 20 years ago from now, I was in a studio in Radio France. I was facing a recording of Alexandre Tarot. Alexandre Tarot is probably one of the greatest pianists in Europe, in France. And he was alone in this piano, and I was in the studio just facing how the creation is fairly simple at the end. But when I just realized that all the complexity to help these creators, these artists, to offer his art to the public and audience, and something like 10 years later, I just realized that blockchain could be a very, very good way to help them to promote, but to protect, because artists and creators are facing a very huge dependency today to the platform. It was a good opportunity for them, but now they need to promote and to protect and to get the value of their work. So that's why we were building something like the idea of that we need to find the tools to avoid complexity, but to help creators to understand technology. It's not a no-code approach, it's a deep technology approach with Tezos, but we believe that they need to understand how it works.
And Frédéric?
Yeah, what I hear about on-chain, in fact, I think it's a new possibilities to manage rights on creation, of course, art, but also music or fashion. And on-chain doesn't mean online. Of course, you have a lot offline with the web because it brings people to enjoy art in a new way. But the on-chain will be the possibility to create new kind of relationship with the ownership of the artwork, to share the ownership, and to find new kind of financement for creation, for artists, for museum, for indie brands, etc.
Thank you very much for that. We're missing one crucial piece, though, and I thought Inez might be the person to talk about this, which is community and how valuable that is to this economy. Inez, could you maybe comment on your experience, especially with what you've been doing, and how community plays a very significant piece in this as well?
Yes, of course. Thank you for that question. My own sense of blockchain and how can I find that amazing is that it allows artists, but not only, it allows people to be sovereign of their own creation, to be sovereign of their own data. And this changed everything from the Web 2. We arrived on a technology called Web 3, where everything is decentralized and where everything is transparent and protected. And those are the keywords of the idea, maybe the beautiful idea that we want from democracy and society today. And definitely we've seen the 2 last decades that then community is strong. Even to stand up for a message or a cause, you can attack a person, you can't attack, or it's more difficult to attack a community. If you attack me, hundreds of thousands people are behind protecting me. This is the thing with blockchain. It can put in failure any big consortium. Sorry for the bad word with the name of your company, but this is nothing to see with you. But the big tech, the big power in place, they are in failure facing the community you can create on the blockchain, and specifically for culture. And what can I see so far is the way that you can create a complete boundless economy, first artistically, then financially speaking. We can talk about that maybe later, but also in terms of society and in terms of how you exist as a musician, as an artist, a painter, whatever. But you exist, and paradoxically, you exist because you're untrackable, and you're completely independent, while you depend on every other part. So there is something definitely magic, something you talked about. We have to make people adopt this technology. I understand, but I think more powerful is we have to make people adopt a new concept of society based on something completely decentralized. That is the key message for me.
Thank you very much. And Vincenzo, I realize that you're in your team yourself. There probably are more where I was 9 months ago. Part of a bastion, certainly of the traditional art world as we've known it for several hundred years now. But Tezos is a partner of the fair, and we've had the pleasure of presenting NFTs to your community. And I thought perhaps you could speak to your team, or even your audiences, as you understand it, approach to this Web3 opportunity, or perhaps even, I understand there's a lot of resistance as well within the traditional art world. I certainly can identify in terms of the nerves that I first felt learning more about this space. But if you could speak to your team's approach to why is Tezos part of a relevant conversation, and what does that on-chain cultural economy mean for your audiences?
So let me start saying that contemporary art, if we speak about strictly contemporary art, needs to speak about the time we live in. And even though you are right, saying that a lot of people have resistance, it would be blind, for lack of a better word, for institutions like the one I represent now, not to see what's going on and not really to be at the forefront of the conversation. So although we represent really a live event market, we actually are very interested in knowing what's after this and what can work now as a hybrid model, and how we can shape a future in which the two worlds really move together into what we can deny will be more and more digital world. In the resistance, though, just to go back to a little bit of your question, I think starts with, and maybe my colleague panelist here can prove me wrong, is that the art, visual art specifically, as opposed to music or cinema or other, is something that usually has been in few people's hand, and it needs to be in the way this has been always driven in few people's hand because it's object-based. The art, well, the museums are getting there, but we work at a pace that other institutions in the art world cannot work at. Our planning is way faster. The way we react to the changes needs to be faster than other people. So we are the platforms where all these changes, where all this partnership can take place.
Wonderful. You've hit the nail on the head, I think. So I don't want to remove what's been so far a very nuanced and very profound exploration here, but I think use cases is often a really important topic off to which to sort of bounce, to especially to new audiences and those who might still be curious. So I'd love to ask each of you what has excited you or surprised you in the recent past when it comes to this, to what's being done within this economy. And I come to that with the understanding we have mentioned music. We could think about luxury branded partnerships and how NFTs have been used by those as well. But just to kind of anchor this down into real world things and moments that have happened, I'd love to hear from you all some of the things that you've seen in the recent past. Also understanding, by the way, that there is, I think, a huge attention on this topic, but it is a relatively young conversation. So I think it's always important to bring up those particular moments. Jean?
Well, I think we are at the beginning of this revolution, and probably if you take the time of a revolution, it's not even the first night of the revolution. It's probably the first hour of, you know, the economy just moving into a new world. For the artists, we always talk about the value. It's true that it's a very important question for them because they need to get the value of their work. But it's also a very interesting new frontier for creation. If you take the example of a well-known artist in the Tezos ecosystem, it's called Zancan. This guy just came from, sorry for them, but he came from nowhere. And he came from the idea that technology could help him to find a new audience, a new public. And also blockchain and technology, especially on the generative art, help him to just to express a new way of creation, express his feelings on a new media. So if you take this example, and if you take the example of all the artists that just came out from the blockchain, it's true that it's at the beginning of it. It's a matter of inspiration, of creation, and tools. If you take the example of the painters at the end of the 19th century, of the beginning of the 20th century, they had the opportunity to find a new way to create because some guys just invent the paint in the tube. So they could just move from Paris, move from here, take the train, go to Deauville and discover new things. And so at this time, technology and techniques are a new way to create for them. So we need to find a way that blockchain, it's not just, you know, a technological transformation or revolution on the ledger technology, was facing transparency. Everything is very important on this, but at the end, what the only matters is my my creation meet the time, meet the audience, meet the public. So let's find a way to open a new frontier for the creators, and explaining to them that they could create, they may create differently on the blockchain economy. So I think it's not only a matter of value, it's a matter of inspiration, and just culture and art is just what binds us together. So we need to face this.
I love how that actually kind of, by accident, maybe translates directly from what you were saying, Vincenzo, in terms of the time, the place, and the audience to create a relationship. So thanks for that. Inez or Frédéric, whoever would like to go first?
As you want.
Okay, I go. Yeah, the main changement, and this is what you said before, is that anyone can be empowered now thanks to the blockchain, and because each of us will be able to drive his opinions and his engagement, he will be able to create some communities, just like you say. And this phenomenon of communities, you can see them on the artist aspect, because they will be able to create something like we call Neuro École de Paris, Les Fauves, etc., etc., and some new ones will be created by with these new tools. But this is the same on the public, because the public will be able to support who they like. It could be an institution, it could be an artist, and all this series of community will create new kind of creation and new kind of relationship on the artist side, but on the public side. And this is why it is important for Art Basel to integrate that new kind of stuff, because of course the beginning was with like the cowboy of the blockchain, but now we know that the galleries and the museum will get into that also.
Yes, to me, you know, regarding my engagement with my NGO, I have one core question that I ask, and I wonder every day, and I ask my community every day, is what's the point of progress if we do not progress? I mean, technology is maybe the answer, okay, but what is the question? I could say that like this. So if we stick to this value question, the point is how we can, you talked about value, and I appreciate that, but it's super important to, and I'm sure you agree, I'm super important to distinguish which kind of value, of course financial value, because it gives power in such society that, such as, but also social value. And I'm sure we all do, that we care about society in real life. So that's why also, and I benefit from the moment to precise, and I'm sure everybody knows, but blockchain, Web3, and metaverse are three specific different things. And you can be a huge fan of blockchain and Web3, and you can completely don't understand metaverse. So once I've said that, maybe we can come back on that later, but it was important to precise regarding what I would like to share. You talked about our experience, recent experience that we enjoyed through cultural blockchain. And maybe what I enjoyed is understanding something super, super clear. At the beginning of NFT, maybe like really when NFTs have been democratized, like maybe a few years ago, we've seen people and other artists and maybe some non-artists sold some NFT super, super expensive. And now we can see that most of the value of these things sold mean nothing, have no worth. And it was interesting to think at the beginning of the fall of the cryptocurrencies value, like, what's the point? And is this a sustainable and viable economy? Of course it is. But right now, like we say, when you have the past and then the future, and in between you have this clair-obscur where the monster come out. This is something that we say, right? And of course it will be a sustainable economy, of course, because blockchain is definitely the future of what we want as a society, like I said. But what we realize is concretely, except for some artwork in the digital world, NFT only have value when they can offer something rewarding in the real life. So how going into the Web3 and using the technology of blockchain and acquiring an NFT on that, and only if it can give you something specific, valuable in terms of social impact or in terms of ego impact, whatever. But if you can have a value in the real life thanks of what you acquire on the Web3, it doesn't exist yet, but on blockchain, then you create value and sustainable value, and you help the technology and as the society. But if it's just to create a different world where you can create something maybe beautiful, maybe valuable financially, but meaningless, I don't think this is sustainable. So this is what I found out, and a nice experience of mine. You can have value, socially speaking, if you can take the value from the virtuality into the reality.
Thank you for that. Perhaps you have something.
Yeah, I'd like to add something because I think Ines touched on something very important that I've been thinking lately. I think this is because of the crash and because of the moment. There was a big hype, and it was a lot of people only considered this whole revolution just a big financial opportunity. So if we believe really that history, and I wrote this in our chat, if we really believe that history kind of comes back in cycles, I believe that this is the moment after what we can call a little bit of a crash where things have to shape up and really being content-based. Because if we want this to be a real revolution, and I believe it's going to be, it has to be, there's no other way, it needs to come from content and not from financial needs or speculation that people have. So I can say, I all have faith that now, because there's almost like a clean slate after this whole hype, I think there's a moment where people are going to take on in a very different way, and whoever is going to be investing, and I'm not talking about financial investment, but content investment, is going to start from a very different approach.
Yeah, this idea of value is very interesting because it's a matter of social value, impact, maybe on the planet, or just you need to embrace a cause or something for artists. But I think that nothing really good happened in a world of comfort. So we need to take the advantage of this crash. It's a small crash facing the tremendous crash in the history. So we need to be modest about all this. But it's a difficult moment because it's just like Katrina. There has been a hurricane on the artist, and everyone says you're gonna make money, easy money. But it's not like that. It's more complicated than that. So we need to find a way to offer the artist tools to take the cause of changing the way we are facing social impact and things like that. If you take the example of the guys who invented the blockchain, something like more than 20 years ago, they thought about blockchain as a new way to invent a good and transactional technology. They didn't imagine that it would be something like 20 years later, an art matter. They couldn't just imagine that their work, their new way of facing the digital industries and their fear about that a large company would take control. The matter was about transaction, and now it's all about art. Without the artist, I think that blockchain would be a subject for bankers and investors. It wouldn't be an issue for art as it is today. So thank you for that. Thanks to the artists to just help us to make the blockchain something just useful for them.
I'll add my own quick experience recently. Some of you might have heard that the Tezos Foundation has recently secured a partnership with the Serpentine Galleries, and we celebrated this partnership last week in London over a breakfast where 2 artists were speaking about DAOs, and to see in the sense of another bastion of contemporary art and sort of traditional trading and the validation of contemporary art, which I was trying to explain to my parents earlier today to no avail, and to see this discussion, which is so foreign to the traditional art community, something that I mean I didn't know what a DAO was, 12 months ago. I'm not going to go into the complexities of it here because they operate in very many different ways, but I encourage you to do some research on this model that I think is very much about the on-chain cultural economy as well. It's changing completely what does ownership mean from an individual perspective versus a collective perspective, and also with collective financial models that can be quite complex as well, which I find really intriguing, adopting particular financial models from an international perspective to be able to execute decision making in a very democratic way, both within art but also just in exchange of information, of book publishing, of just performance projects, and actually even building art collections for investment or otherwise. So I think that's also something that I think has become a fascinating variable in this equation. I'm worried that we're like sort of getting through my questions, but I want to kind of skip through to something else. Because it touches on this democratic aspect, and it also goes towards your comments, Inez, before I go into the sort of future of what we all hope this economy will be. One of the challenges I feel the traditional art world is facing right now, and certainly I faced it in my early days, is that there's so many people trying to take advantage of this technology, that tools are being built across the world with overlapping utility. People are having the same discussion in many different languages, and unfortunately those who can't speak English are slightly disadvantaged, as sort of is a repeat of the traditional art world economy already. But I think there is a huge value to decentralization, but in the traditional art world, a market leader sort of makes the decisions, right? When all of the different e-commerce art platforms first came out, and I remember being at an art fair and people would bring iPads and show me Artbinder and Artsy and all of these different things, and I just, you get frustrated because you're not there to be sold a service. It quickly, one thing becomes what's adopted by many. And I think there's a natural tension there in this on-chain cultural economy versus the traditional economy. And I thought maybe we could explore that tension a little bit more in terms of, how do we help lead the horse to water in terms of you're having established a tool, and bringing ideas together around those things to be able to kind of maximize value whilst also not inhibiting decentralization as a source of innovation as well.
Sorry for that, but I think we need to just look in the back in the history of technology. Something like 15 years ago, the possibility of streaming a video online was something that YouTube just, get into and say, okay, I find a new way to create value. That was Google at the time. But they couldn't imagine that something like 10 years later, Netflix and Disney would be here. So I think for now, it's very difficult to say that our technology, this blockchain technology, there is something much bigger hiding in the front of us. Streaming, it's a revolution of creation. If you just walk in the street of Los Angeles for now, you will see only advertising for platforms. And something like 10 years ago, it was big studios advertised just for movie and now it's shows on TV, on Netflix. So the creation is just facing a new way. For example, all the economy of the show business, and especially on the movie industry, just shifted from one model to another and offer the creators new opportunities. So we need to be very modest about what we are facing in the technology. See the cloud, for example. The cloud is very important for artists because it's a possibility to storage everything you want somewhere, but you don't know where. It put something like 10 years for Adobe to make understand to the photographer, for example, that cloud was a good thing for them. So we need to take, like a pellegrin stick and to go to the artist on the art fairs, to the gallery, to the museum, explaining that we don't know what's going to come up, but we can build something very interesting because it has impact, I think.
Many reactions, actually. First of all, you challenged us again on democratization and what blockchain can bring about that. First of all, maybe we could, you talked about history, maybe I could talk about the genesis of blockchain. Blockchain has been created in 2008 about decentralization and about giving sovereignty and power to people. And after it has been, blockchain has been a pure, innovative reaction to the 2008 crisis, financial crisis. A guy, Japanese, we heard, maybe a bunch of people.
Maybe
we don't
from
know,
Texas.
Maybe a woman,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Maybe a group of women.
Absolutely. So maybe those persons, because you can't be alone, right? Those persons really wanted a change, a shift for society, like sovereignty and democracy. So this is the first thing I wanted to precise and maybe to remember. Then, we live in a society, a civilization, and we have such stakes that we have to understand that we have two visions of what we do. We have a micro vision and a macro vision. We have a micro vision in terms of how can I earn my life? How can I have a cultural economy more fair for me and my fellows, right? I have to know logistically how can I storage my artwork, right, etc. But we also have a micro responsibility, and like it or not, this is like this. And specifically because just if you have to honor the genesis of blockchain, I mean, I'm not talking since 20 minutes about responsibilization and social impact, just to being nice. I am saying that because this is the genesis and the pure DNA of blockchain. And we have to respect that, I think. So we have a micro vision where we have to take into consideration that the planet is burning, for example, that we have a stake of inclusivity and a stake of visibility of everybody. We have a lack of women into this industry, the economy and the cultural economy, industry. So how can we go toward this direction? And right now, when I heard about big tech taking advantage of how you can storage and how you can do that and how you can entertain, etc., I just think that at the beginning, blockchain is an opportunity and an alternative to do something different. And if we use a democratized and a democratizing technology to reinforce and give strength to the capitalistic world, I don't think what's the point, and specifically if it pollutes our home. I mean, blockchain is not a zero carbon industry, we know that, right? But industry is working on that, actors like you, and this is specifically why I'm here today, because you make efforts, Tezos, and we appreciate that. But what's the point of having a super inspiring technology for a better tomorrow for our children when we want to marry that with
specifically what we don't want anymore? This is just the question I want to ask.
That's an incredibly good point. I mean, I think I was thinking about it specifically from the tooling and adoption perspective, but I think you're absolutely right to highlight the foundation of this conversation, of why we're here, of the importance of this movement, and exactly to the idea of that this new on-chain economy has a future. It is rising, and there are going to have to be, I think, fundamental ethical and personal and societal decisions to be made at every step of this process, even if we're only in the first hour, of course. With 10 minutes to go, I think if you're all right with my moving to one last question that I want every single one of you to answer, and you can do it in your own time. It's really about what you're excited for in the future. And I think, as much as we can explore use cases and the sort of principles of the technology and what's happening on chain, I'd love to hear from each of you, especially given the diversity of backgrounds in this panel. I think it's really the perfect group of people to be having this discussion, what you're excited for 2023.
Yes. Well, I'm not sure I can answer what I'm excited for the 2023, but I can tell you what I'm excited in this specific case for the future, whether it's near or far.
That's fine too.
Doesn't really matter. And when I say this, is because I believe that there should be, what I'm expecting is the real revolution. I'm expecting this to become a foundational moment. I'm expecting to still see the moment in which, I don't know how many years later, someone puts a bicycle wheel in a museum and changes the art world. I'm expecting this to happen with the Web3 and the blockchain. I still haven't seen it, and it might not come tomorrow, it might not come in 10 years, it might come in 15 years. I don't have the answer, but it will come. And whoever does that, it will change the world.
I was going to say the same thing, so now I'm just super annoyed that you took my answer, so here we go.
Yeah, the changement we see, of course, here we are focused on art, it's normal, but we see that kind of thoughts in any activities, human activities, and all we said about the content, the use, maybe we should try to make people forget it is tech, because finally it's just the background, and the creation of new communities and engagement. I'm very curious, in fact, of what's going to happen in the politics, because if we think about a very long term, we try to invent the individual during the Renaissance, and we have this moving in political area, and this is what we call democracy. And maybe the blockchain will be a new tool for democratic way to be an actor. And because in many areas, you have the one who say and you have the one who listen to. And what we try to do with the democracy is that everyone can say. And finally, with these new tools, in any activities, you will have something a mix between the one who act and the one who listen to, and they may be all together finally.
Coming from the UK, this is especially poignant right now.
Especially today.
Yes, especially today. Yes, thank you. Inez.
I talk too much already now.
Well, I'm excited to see what you're doing. I mean, we've had very lengthy conversations now. So if I may say, I think that the projects that you have planned for next year are going to be revolutionary in terms of galvanizing women in not just this space, but in arts and culture in general. And I admire you a great deal for having the bravery to step in and not just say it's a problem, but do something about it.
Well, thank you so much, Valerie. Yes, indeed. And thanks to you, because you give me so much energy. But yes, the event of next year that I am planning is about, between many things else, is to put the women at the heart of this economy. And I want them, as many as possible, to understand the cultural blockchain economy. I think this is key to have inclusivity, to have balance. So yes, this is something I would love to see happen.
And if we're going to solve Vincenzo's problem, it's going to be women.
Absolutely.
We have to admit.
Absolutely.
If I, well, yesterday evening I saw a very, very interesting documentary about how during the war here in Paris and in Europe, something like 1.5 million artworks have been stolen and put into German caves. It's a very, very horrible story. I believe that maybe something like in 400 years from now, every artwork is somewhere protected forever. So there wouldn't be any problem to find back, you know, the astronome from Vermeer, because the astronome from Vermeer was stolen from the Louvre and put into the personal collection of Hitler. So it was a horrible story. But this piece of art, if we can help to, you know, to invent and to promote the next Vermeer, and this piece of art would be on the blockchain forever, maybe we can do something good. That's it.
No, I think that's a perfect resolution. I think you're absolutely right. You know, my kind of background coming to this in terms of authenticity stems also from that element of safety and of safeguarding heritage, of safeguarding innovation and genius, whether it be an on-chain cultural economy related specifically to fine art or otherwise, whether it be performance, music. You know, I think John Cage would have been super excited to mint his composition on chain. So not just to have a new form of art be present at a cultural institution, but also to really be able to preserve and conserve culture and what our history means to us. So thank you, everyone. We've got like just 2 minutes left. So if one person really quickly wants to ask a question. Oop, we have, all right, thank you. Sorry, it's not for more, but I'm...
Thank you. Thank you very much for the talk. I recently read an interview from French artist Valérie Granger, and she contributed to the rise of net art and more recently crypto art. And what struck me was how she had to fight very hard to negotiate her royalties with such new kind of art, right? And then to be actually accepted in galleries. And with NFTs, it was quite inherent to get royalties for the creators. And recently, we saw a new trend where royalties are actually taking off the creators on platforms like Magic Eden and Solana, for instance, or other PFP projects, profile pictures NFT projects like DGods. And I wanted to have your opinion about that, maybe your vision about the future of royalties.
I think, Frédéric, maybe if you want to start that, as we sort of spoke about it too.
Yeah, no, I think we're going to integrate the royalties into a smart contract. And so it makes that the artist will have some income from the secondary market. This is a first point, but it will allow him to follow the fortunes of his artwork in times. And it's going to be the same for the young gallerist who try to put on the highlight young artists, and then when they are successful, the artists go to Gagosian or Perrotin, and the young gallerists stay alone in the corner. So with that kind of royalties, it might be interesting for the artist, but also the gallerist.
It's also a matter of understanding what's a smart contract, and it's too late for now to explain that. But what's very interesting with the standard that especially Tezos invented is that it's possible, you know, to rewrite the smart contract. The smart contract is on the blockchain, but we need to find a way to change the attributes of the smart contract in the time. So the standard of AFA2, it's a smart contract from Tezos. It's very good for that because we can manage the smart contract in the time. So I think royalties, it's not a photography of one time. It's a moving way of distributing the value around the time. And also because artists are not alone creating. They are creating with, for example, a photographer. He has a model. He has several people around him. So he needs to to, to share the value, to get the value and to share. And the smart contract is for this something like extraordinary revolution that we need to embrace, definitely. Thank you for that.
I agree. I would say, whilst the sort of in perpetuity aspect of smart contracts, I think, is for another discussion. It's very, very important that the traditional art market understand the values and the structure of this new on-chain cultural economy, and I think they will soon see the advantages. So thank you, everyone, for participating and for being here today, and thanks again to my panelists.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Elle m'entend depuis tout à l'heure, parce que moi je m'entends.
Hi, everyone. I am delighted to kick off this new session, Creating and Collecting Art for the Planet. You will see it's all about being passionate and very engaged for the environment and better future. I am Diane Drubé. I am head of art and culture at TZ Connect, which is a Tezos hub in Berlin. I'm also a visual artist and a digital artist, nudging for nature awareness and positive futures. I have here with me in the room and online Michelle Brown. Michelle is an Australian artist. She's a new media artist highlighting climate awareness using virtual and augmented reality. She's part of the Web3 scene since early 2020 and is one of the founding artists of the Clean NFT movement. John Gerhardt, also joining us online, is a major contemporary artist rethinking land art and performance art using virtual worlds with political resonance around energy production, food systems, and other very timely subjects. Joanie Lemercier, at my right, as a visual artist and environmental activist whose work explores human perception through the manipulation of light in space. He is also one of the main artists putting the light on the former Tezos-based marketplace Hiket for its low carbon footprint. And Sébastien Heyman, he has been leading the way when it comes to impact-driven fundraising and partnerships, and he founded a few months back the Good Society, which is leveraging environmental artists to support environmental non-profits. So as you could guess, I talked a lot about the environment, about the planet, about art, and our main question now is how to use all these tools to create positive futures. Digital art is now a tool, is now being used for much more than just art. It is used also to help people being engaged and to support different causes. So I have one really simple question for you all. What are your tools to move people and engage them into a cause? Sébastien?
Shall I start?
It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you, everyone, for coming on a Sunday. On my side, I think I'm the only one who's not the artist on the panel, so maybe I can give you my vision on how I can move people and how I can have an impact on the planet through digital art. So as Diane mentioned, I founded the Good Society with the goal to help nonprofit to get funded. And with the rise of digital art and also NFTs and different options that the blockchain offers, we decided as a collective, so we are artists, creatives, and also activists, to leverage the power of NFTs and creating every month's collection designed by an artist, famous artist most of the time. And those collections are being sold on Tezos, and between 70% to 95% of the sales goes to 3 non-profits every month. And we also try to move people through art, and that's the 3 pillars of a company: is art, impact, and experiences. And the art always comes first for us because we believe that art is the most powerful tool that we have. And I'm so lucky to be with those legends today on the panel to question things. I think we will talk about that later with Joanie. And also to move people, to raise awareness, and to also mention like what you can do for the environment. So yeah, that's, I think, the way I try with the Good Society to move people's heart.
Thanks. John, may I ask you some questions? What are your tools to engage people?
So yeah, as you outlined, I work as an artist. I've been doing so for nearly 2 decades now. And in those 2 decades, really my primary tool has been like virtual worlds, realized through game engines. And one of the most exciting spaces to work, let's say with world making, because, building virtual worlds is a kind of world making, is very definitely in the public domain. And historically, the public domain for me was very much on the street. I think, as you mentioned, Diane, using LED walls to bring works, pieces of mine like Western Flag or Solar Reserve, a lot of which relate to subjects of energy and power, to bring them to the public, a little bit outside of the cultural spaces, although I have shown in museums and such places. And I guess really my excitement about art online, the sort of energy which has emerged around NFTs, is that it is this very radical new space for kind of public art. Very briefly, I've just done my very first project on Tezos, which was on FX Hash, which is called Bonework, which is a project which looks at dead coral just off the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, of the Yucatan Peninsula. And actually, funnily enough, within the same month, another project on Tezos with Feral File, which is called Smoke Hands. It's a piece in which I'm holding a sort of a bowl, I'm sort of cradling smoke. Really, but just to reiterate, my principal tool is to produce these sort of poetic, in a way, artworks, and then through the blockchain, through these radical new platforms such as FX Hash or Feral File, to try and engage and move the public through that mechanism.
Talking about word making, Michelle Brown is also making and building virtual worlds. Can you tell us more about what kind of tools do you use, and maybe talk about the last VR project you are working on?
Sure, thanks, Diane. I'm here all the way from Australia, and I'm a new media artist. For the last several years, I've been creating immersive experiences with virtual and augmented reality. Most of those are about highlighting climate change or raising awareness. And in the last few years, I was working on a big project called Gondwana VR, which was a virtual experience that showcased the effects of climate change on the Daintree rainforest, which is here in my home state, and using climate data projections. And I guess, it's quite dear to my heart, trying to highlight the beauty of nature, plus what climate change is doing and creating devastating effects. And I've been been releasing sort of 3D artworks on Tezos for over a year now, since the early days. And my most recent project I've been working on, I just wanted to push what's being done with blockchain and virtual experiences and integrating, Tezos and NFTs. And so the project I'm working on is called Floodplains XYZ, and it's basically a small interactive web-based experience and virtual experience where you're placed inside a house and you have a very short time to collect mementos before the house floods. The water rises too high and you get trapped in the house. So something pretty passionate about. This last weekend, we've had more alerts here from our state government about potential flooding. So, as others probably aware of the devastation in Pakistan, floods in Nigeria as well. So something that I've been my tools to highlight and raise awareness. Very much virtual reality.
Talking about immersion, definitely immersing someone in a virtual world and telling a story and asking this visitor, this user, this participant, this spectator to act and to engage is a really personal and really physical way to engage and to share a story and to share a message. So I totally feel you there, and I know that Joanie, you're also very much working with immersion and immersive spaces.
So I'm sort of new to bringing ecological questions in my artworks and also new to activism. So I find it very difficult now to sort of articulate this thinking. So I apologize if you can feel a sense of panic and you know, a slightly weird sense of urgency in what I'm about to say. So I'm going to try to tell 4 years of activism in like 3 minutes, so bear with me. But I guess what strikes me the most is that for many, many years, we've all been hearing those stories about the IPCC report, the targets that we are missing, the fossil fuel industry, increasing production. As we speak, the dictators from the oil companies in the office of Mr. Macron. And so nothing is moving, and actually moving more in the opposite direction of what we need. But for many years, you know, I felt disconnected from those questions. I could hear about the floods, the droughts, the food shortage and everything. And I was like, oh, you know, I'm in this sort of bubble of art and technology, and maybe I can't do anything. And I was still, you know, flying all around the world to Basel, to Miami, to see my gallerist in New York twice a year. And, you know, I was like, oh, maybe I'm out of this question. And then something incredible happened 3 years ago. I visited the Garsweiler coal mine in Germany. Believe it or not, it's only 1 hour and a half from Brussels, from my studio. It's the largest coal mine of Europe. It emits 100 million tons of CO2 emissions a year. So these numbers make no sense to me. But what struck me really was the sense of it looks like the end of the world. For me, as a visual artist, I felt like a visual aesthetic shock because it's a gigantic hole of 8 kilometers by 5 kilometers. It's kind of beautiful in a way. It really looks like Mad Max 2 and 3. But it does feel the end of everything, the end of humanity. It feels like a massive grave, and actually populations are being displaced, villages are being destroyed, churches and heritage is being demolished. And every time I kept going, because I started being obsessed by this location, which I think is an hyper-object, as Timothy Morton puts it. It's a location, it's so huge that it's impossible to understand it. But it's the perfect visual representation of what we are facing as a struggle to protect what we have. So I was so blown away when I went there a few years back that I kept going again over and over. And I became an activist overnight. I started to lower my consumptions. So I did something like extremely boring. I did a spreadsheet of all my consumptions, gas, eating, electricity, travel. It's utterly boring, but I knew where to start from. So I had those numbers. And with Juliette, who's running the studio with me, we decided to reduce those consumptions every year by at least 10%. We decided to stop traveling as much as we used to. We decided to reduce plane travel as much as we can. So maybe once every few years, we'll do one exception, but we'll stay in the country for like many weeks. So we did a lot of things. One of them was to avoid using Ethereum. As you may know, Ethereum transaction, the blockchain that made the NFTs popular, emits about 100 kilos of CO2 per transaction. It's no longer the case, but that was the case a year ago. So this is when the sort of Tezos community emerged, when as artists we decided to avoid polluting practices, and then we sort of created, Michel was very early in the days in the clean NFT community, and actually it's very heartwarming to see that those values and ethics, there is a space where artists care, and actually hundreds of artists have joined us, and Jan also very early, you were part of this. So you know, beyond the activism that I also support Extinction Rebellion or Ende Gelände, I think there's a space for discussions and you know, to sort of see where we put the ethical cursor and how we see the future together.
Calling yourself an activist is something that not everyone could have the courage to do. It's something that I am doing as well for a few years, being active in Extinction Rebellion and in other groups. But it's not so easy when you actually face museums or collectors or galleries. What is your what is your journey as an activist, being an artist and also an activist?
So it was very complex at first because filming coal mines was very far away from my practice. I was making mostly geometrical works, abstract geometry and large-scale installations. But with the help of Juliette, who runs the studio with me, we managed to put this content, those drone images of the coal mine, in a body of work, in a film called Slow Violence. And we've been lucky enough to show this film to almost 200,000 people over the past year. So I doubt it's going to change the world, but at least now in my practice, I'm very critical about the impact of technologies. And in the art world, I can hear those questions echoing. So activism is also more and more accepted because there's such an urgency to do anything.
John, I'll be curious to know what is your own perspective on it and your own, how people actually are reacting when you say that, when you talk about the climate, when you talk about the environment, how galleries and collectors are reacting. And could you call yourself an activist?
I typically don't call myself an activist, although I'm an artist, very much engaged with ecological subjects. And as I said before, that space where power intersects with energy. That's an area that I'm very interested in. As Joni identified, at the start of when he was speaking, one of the components about being a working contemporary artist now is an expectation of hypermobility. There is no doubt about that. And so within reason, I just was in the Sydney Biennale and I didn't go. I was in the Guangzhou Biennale, couldn't go because of COVID, but probably wouldn't have gone. This kind of hyper mobility, which is expected. Ironically, the COVID, epidemic has progressed things like Zoom. I mean, I was not a Zoomer prior to COVID, and suddenly I can do this, as opposed to necessarily coming to Paris. But yeah, so I guess, as I'm connected with a system which is really quite compromised, let's say the contemporary fine art system, which involves hypermobility, which involves, it's geographic. You guys are in Paris, at Paris Plus. A lot of people have come to Paris for it. A lot of work has been shipped for it, et cetera, et cetera. It is predicated on a certain type of analog practice for the most part. I'd say almost entirely, and a certain expectation that people will turn up geographically and sort of perform as collectors or galleries or whatever it may be. So, yeah, as I'm connected with that system, I'm a little bit wary of describing myself as an activist, even though I do my best to sort of like work within it ethically. But just kind of looping a little bit back to what I mentioned before, what's incredible about, let's see, the NFT platforms is that people are collecting and supporting artists, post-geographically. They're anywhere on Earth and they're collecting art and they're owning things that are not tangible. They're not physical things, and that's an enormous breakthrough in terms of how people can live and how people can survive, and how people can, in a way, thrive as an artist. I suppose the other thing for me is that, as an artist, I try to pay attention to, let's say, the potential for various different forms of collective activity. One of those collective activities is democracy and voting. And, what do people carry in their hearts when they, respond to certain kind of political dialogues? And for me, the piece which I've described earlier, which is called Western Flag, which in a way tries to reveal the carbon dioxide legacy, where it's cited in the very first major oil strike in world history happened in 1901 in Spindletop in Texas, Spindletop. And I placed a flag of smoke there, to kind of recall less what oil achieved, transforming agriculture, transforming transport, warfare, etc., and more what it left behind, which is, that CO2 from the 1910s, 20s, 30s, a large proportion of that CO2 is still in the atmosphere. And it's just interesting for me to try and bring people to that knowledge. And also talking about nationalism and, in a way, kind of petro-nationalism, which, is another layer. And perhaps move them to, approach, their democratic decision-making in maybe in an adjusted or slightly changed way. So that would be about as activist as I would dare to present myself.
I don't know. I will not call myself an activist. But I build the tools for people to become one. That's what I think. And if people want to call me an activist, I'm happy to be named like that. It's a bit like at which point do you become an artist? I'm creating myself some NFTs since a few weeks. And I don't know if I can call myself an artist, even though I sold a few once on objects without my name on it. Like, people don't know that's me. I know it's a bit complicated, but I would just say that I care about the planet, the environment, its inhabitants as well, and the animals. And yeah, I think I really focus on just showing and inspiring people for them to be able to do something for any causes that we mention.
Well, I think what is really interesting with the Good Society that it's not just about collaborating with one artist and giving one part of the benefits to an NGO, but it's also offering a journey, offering an experience, which is really a human experience. So it's going away from the art, away from digital art, away from NFTs and blockchain, and it's actually landing on something which is really human and tangible. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, I didn't mention that before. When I was saying our pillars are arts, impact, and experience, the utility that we give to our NFTs and to the holders, 1 NFT out of 10 from all of our collection, holds a special experience, real life experience. So it might sound a bit crazy, but we fly someone to South Africa to rewild an elephant. Maybe they take a boat, I don't know. We also have, like, one NFT holds a masterclass with the artist. One NFT holds like an invite to the COP27 in Cairo. Yeah, and all the non-profit that we work with, they really play the game. And I think it's not just about, it's a lot about the art, of course, and the collection that we create, we always create from scratch with the artist. So there is also a narrative behind the art, which is really important. And all the non-profit that we work with, they all join, and also our partners, which are brands, and we also try to give the utility to the membership of the society, the Good Society, which is going to release that later this year. And the membership is not going to be based on who you are, but what you have done in the past. So you're going to have different layers of membership, and if you have been volunteering for 20 years, you're going to have a higher place. And it's not a place, it's higher access to all the community, all the holders. That's what we really want to try to give. And for the people that try to when they acquire an art piece, they do good because they can give 80% or 95% to 3 causes or 3 non-profits, but also they become an activist somehow because they are part of a group, and that's the beauty of NFTs. And also having the royalties which are within each NFTs. There is royalties as well for each NGOs. So that's basically what we try to achieve next year. Is a big mission, to keep fundings for NGOs and give value as well for the people that acquire. So you acquire a piece of art not only for the sake of the art, but also for what it gives access to.
Yeah, an art collector is becoming much more than just collecting art. It's also supporting a cause, being part of a movement, and much more. Talking about a movement, Michel, can you tell us more about the Clean NFT movement, what it is, what has been done? I remember in the days last year on Hiket-Nunk, from one day to another, seeing the community really gathering and starting a campaign of donation for so many different reasons. I remember when it was the fires in Turkey, and for so many different reasons. I actually felt that last year, I don't know if it's still happening, but I don't see it happening so much. But last year, every week, we had actually a cause to support, and artists were donating art or donating Tezos directly. But donating art and collecting art was a gesture of being part of something, of really caring and being engaged and supporting a cause. Yeah, Michelle, can you tell us more about the Clean NFT movement?
Yeah, I suppose that started early on in 2021, and it the Clean NFT movement came out of some research that Memo Acton was doing, and he had been posting about Ethereum being quite energy intensive because of the proof of work consensus mechanism it was using, and I suppose as Joni mentioned, that's how quite a few of us came together on Twitter and Discord because we all became aware of this and we all wanted to talk more about it. We all were looking for more research and information, and we started a Discord, and we held spaces and clubhouse chats, and I suppose there was quite a few artists from around the world that were really concerned about using these new technologies that might be impactful from the environment. And for myself, as someone who uses a lot of new technology and has been in my arts practice for a while now, I do like to challenge the ethical use of technology, and for example, artificial intelligence and machine learning, where that's going at the moment. I think we can't just sit back. Someone has to challenge these things to make sure that we're using them ethically, and we have the best way forward to make sure they're also not impactful on the environment. And when we were searching, I suppose, for an alternative to Ethereum, so we could still use blockchain for this new technology and for digital art, that's when I guess Tezos came on the scene with Hiket-Nunk and Calumet marketplaces launching, I think, March in 2021. Was it 2021? Gosh, it can't even. The years just seem to go so fast. It's hard to kind of keep up with where things are at. But I suppose what was really great to see about that community forum was the strong Global South representation. So, I'd been dipping into Ethereum NFTs for a year, and I suppose, it did seem quite a heavily global north, I suppose, with lots of US and European marketplaces available. And I suppose the fact that Hiket-Nunk was a Brazilian marketplace from, one man who had, presented this open source solution, we all very much became enamored with the DIY kind of cultural ethos of it. And like you mentioned, Diane, the fundraising initiatives, and they are still going on through the Tezos marketplaces. Taya has a very strong push towards making sure that there's always a support going towards any sort of crises that pop up. So most recent ones were the Pakistan flood fundraising and Iranian women's support. So yeah, I think it's a beautiful community that sort of formed out of this need and want for more information to make sure that we as artists were doing the best we could to use this new technology. Yeah.
Any comments?
There's so much to say, and I remember the early days of Hiket-Nunk. It was the most experimental website. There was no information about anything. It was so weird, but you could really see the sense of community and like people discussing, asking questions, trying to break down the energy cost of like minting work, and like really doing some research. And it's really Memo that did this sort of background check of the information we were given. And on the Ethereum side, I must say my experience has been a bit of a disaster on the ethical level. I worked with Nifty Gateway, and they were saying, "Don't worry about it. Don't worry about the impact. You know, we're going to sell everything," and they didn't care about anything else much. And actually, Nifty Gateway, if you buy an artwork today, it's not even on the blockchain. They run a local database, and it's a fucking scam, and we know it. And you know, it's open, and nobody really seemed to care because there's so much money to be made, and the collectors are being. They're just being taken their money. It's not on the blockchain, you know, and in the Tezos community, all these things were debated openly. People would do some research, put everything on GitHub. Kyle MacDonald did like a really, really interesting breakdown also on Ethereum. So it has been very polarizing, but the quality of the discourse on values, ethics, transparency, I haven't seen anything like this on Ethereum, and it's been like we've had conversation with John about like other topics like carbon offset and stuff. That's how I met Michelle. I think this is like a wonderful place to talk about like very important core values of what we want to defend as artists. So it's not just like a fun new technology. I think it's deeply grounded into something that a lot of us value as very important.
John, maybe because you had an experience on Ethereum, and then now, you are starting to mint on Tezos. Last week, you minted on FXH at 365 editions. Can you tell us more about your experience there? How do you feel about it?
Well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge Joni's generosity. Actually, on a couple of occasions, he has reached out and sort of guided me in terms of me trying to find solutions for different projects in a way. Right back when I made my first NFT, actually, which was on a single work on Foundation, like about a year and a half ago now, and he was instrumental in framing some of my thinking at that time. And also rightly being critical of carbon capture, which was I needed to do in a way more research on, and I've since stepped away from. But I think, funnily enough, one of the most beautiful things about the two most recent projects that I've done, one on, as I said, FXH, and the other one on Feral File, founded by the wonderful Casey Rias, is actually the number of artists and actually curators who've been able to connect with the work, you know, through those platforms. I mean, I have this kind of funny, you know, other world, which is, you know, XE's game engine-based works and editions of 4, which are distributed through the gallery model, which, you know, really is a kind of physical model. You send things, you send computers to places, and the work gets kind of realized in these different geographic settings. You know, in this kind of post-geographic kind of online setting, and also within the economics, in a way, of Tezos and within the economics of these platforms, FXH and Feral File, I think the most moving thing has to be getting a lot of messages from artists, particularly saying, you know, we've admired your work for many years, and we're just so thrilled to have one, you know, that they could actually connect with the work. And, you know, I suppose there's a whole nother discussion about what ownership means, but it is significant to people that they feel that they you know, they own an artwork in a way, it joins their estate. They can kind of, you know, they can live with it in a different sort of way. So, I mean, I guess, you know, the movement of Ethereum from proof of work to proof of stake, you know, will shift things in terms of those kind of different sorts of engagements with these platforms. But certainly for me, I always really wanted to come into the Tezos network, mostly because of that very profound sense of community. And also because of, in a way, the very specific economic frameworks within it that allow, I suppose, broader communities to engage, you know, collect, swap. And just it's the generosity of it was something that I've really, it's been a highlight of many years of work doing these two projects recently.
Thank you. I think it's beautiful that you are talking about generosity. I think it's also a feeling that we all have since we started in this community. It's kind of a big family. The vibe is really, really friendly. Talking about community, talking about maybe utility token, Sebastian, how are you actually thinking about the next steps, having all these collectors engaging in your projects, collecting the artists that you are collaborating with and donating to different NGOs? Do you have in mind a way to create a community with all of them?
Yeah, as I said before, like the membership of the Good Society is going to be a good one, I think. We also want to help artists finding the right non-profits. So I think it's a really hot topic because I remember I met with Zancan. I don't know when it was in Art Basel, I think in Basel, I don't remember who it was. And it was like, oh, I heard what you do and stuff, and I want to have an impact, but I don't know where to start. I'm not a professional and of non-profits. I have another platform called Heroes on the side myself, where we work with more than 150 non-profits. And it was like, can you help me out, navigate that world? And the first collection that we launched, it was also I have to acknowledge him because he bought a couple of pieces and he really liked it and he tweeted us and it really helped us. The next step, I think, for us, for the platform, is really about giving the tools for the artists to being able to create some collection on the Good Society and to be able to really simply link their collection with the right non-profits. So we're going to have, like, on one side the non-profits, on the other side we're going to have the artists. That's the future of the. Maybe I should not say it because, like, maybe somebody is going to steal the idea, but that's really where we go, and that's why we talk a lot with artists and try to also them to be engaged with what we do. So we are planning as well to bring some artists on the ground to see where the money went, to do some video, some content, because it's also about content and the proof of impact somehow, and having the artists on the background. On the ground, and having meeting the non-profits, so really creating connection between this triangle between the donors as well. So yeah, there's so many things to do, and this is so exciting, to be honest, especially because the technology, and also seeing all those artists today and those which we work with, they are so excited to have collection that's our focus on a cause. It's really beautiful and really inspiring to see that there's the movement in the arts. I don't know if I answered your question, actually. I think I went a bit around.
All good. No, I'm actually wondering how the traditional art market is actually reacting to your project and to your different series or drops. Maybe, Sebastian, if you want to keep... do you have some feedbacks from galleries and the traditional art market on how you actually collaborate with these artists?
Yes, I think it's quite new for them because what they do, it's like they do auction, usually like for causes, and having the direct access between the artwork and the donors and the artists, which, we don't have all these intermediaries now on the blockchain. It's really interesting. But we also have, those galleries that want to do the shift and coming, I mean, you know that better than me. And we receive really positive, I've been in contact this week with many galleries that want just to showcase the work that have been done by the artists that we work with, which is really a good first step for us as well. And I see more and more gallerists, taking the step into a more sustainable and more having a narrative around, the artwork. And so, yeah.
So would you say that proof of impact is something that galleries and the traditional art world is starting to consider and to understand?
Yeah, somehow. It will become like you have some galleries that are a bit more, in advance regarding that. But I think it's gonna come. It's gonna come definitely.
Joanny, do you want to say something about it?
That's a hot topic, hot question. I really like how John mentioned the need of hyper mobility in the art world, in the art market. And this is not really being questioned much. When we follow the Instagram stories of all the sort of super successful artists from the mega galleries, there is still this sort of pride of being in airport, living the airport life. And I'm going to be in Berrybell next week and in Miami. And, we understand it's part of the narrative of the sort of hyper of like the mega galleries, and you have to be in these places if you want to be relevant. You have to be at Art Basel Miami. You need to be in Venice twice a year. You need to do those dinners. It's sort of accepted. We know it. It's the rules if you want to be in that bubble. And it's a shame that there is not enough discourse, and like we know that this lifestyle is not sustainable, and it's going to take time. I'm not saying I tried to go to a big exhibition we had in like 2 major institutions of Mexico City and in Peru, and I've tried for 2 months to find like an option with low carbon, and there was none. I tried sailboats, and I did like a breakdown of how we could go with a ferry. There's no way, so it's going to take time. But please, can you at least not brag about airport life? Because this is disgusting. The planet is burning. People are dying in floods, and you're like posting pictures of being in airports. So I get really emotional. This is also connected to my personal experience of seeing how activists are struggling in Garsweiler, near the largest coal mine of Europe, that we need to power electric vehicles, which are the main sponsor, or one of the main official sponsors at Art Basel. So, it's a difficult discussion. And, at least the art world is listening. I know I can see Marc Spiegler, the director of Art Basel, in the room. So at least these topics are heard. And I would love to have like a proper discussion of how can we have an automobile company as a sponsor in 2022. And even if it's electrical vehicles, it's still charged in Germany with coal, and it's killing people because of the pollution. The impacts are real. And as an artist in my art and tech bubble, I was detached from this reality, from the impact of coal mining. And now I'm like very emotional, as you can hear. And I would love to have this conversation with you, Marc, and maybe discuss about this, and maybe next year we can do better. So I'd love to open formally like a discussion with you. And it's a way for me to be an artist and an activist. I think in those places, that's a way to engage with people, discuss. We're not going to change things overnight, but we could at least try.
And it is something that I try to do at Tezos on a daily basis as well, organizing this kind of sessions, raising awareness, highlighting artists going towards positive futures. It's something which is also at the core of our activity and DNA, I would say. Michel, John, Sébastien, do you want to add something, or shall we give the mic directly to Marc? John,
I was just going to very quickly say, just in terms of the question of art collectors from contemporary art collectors, are they moving across the line to collect, let's say, digital artifacts as digital artifacts? In my experience, it's not really happening. I have a very established body of collectors of game engine works, which are kind of, let's say, localized. And the newer collectors of works which are intangible, let's say on-chain, online, is a completely different community. And as somebody who, I own NFTs, I've purchased them, that process of through the NFT mechanism, through the blockchain mechanism, of acquiring a digital thing and for it being yours, if you haven't done that, it's very hard to understand what these things are, what this process is, what this means. And ironically, for me, my entry to this was actually collecting domain names, which I've been doing for many, many years. My favorite domain name is art.farm, which I'm incredibly proud of, and I'm going to use someday. But if you don't possess digital things as digital things, I show somebody a work on my phone, and they're like, "You're showing me something on your phone," and I'm like, "Yes, but it's mine. I own it." So I do think that there's a chasm between the worlds. It's very interesting that Tezos is in Paris Plus and has been in Basel in different sites. And, these things are inching together, but I do think there's still a big gap.
I think we're all working on it. and it takes a lot of time, definitely. Michel, Sébastien, do you want to add something?
I was just going to mention, I suppose, just sort of following on from what John said, in the fact, these digital assets, it is a really interesting way to be able to sell sort of 3D artworks, and I guess a lot of my NFTs are GLBs, so 3D models, because in the past, the only opportunity to sell my sort of 3D VR works were as potentially assets for games or film experiences, and that wasn't quite what I wanted them to be used for. Like, I put a lot of passion and care into my little virtual sculpted nature, because I do a lot of wildlife and flowers and plants. So yeah, for me, it's an interesting way that we can look at holding pieces of art that aren't just flat images, I suppose, that are virtual 3D objects. So and we could talk about metaverse and things like that, and how I suppose Facebook Meta have want to take over that world, and yeah, what that means for NFTs and the Web3 space. I'm interested to see, and potentially why I do sometimes call myself an activist, because I want to push back on multinational ownership of things. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear others' thoughts about the metaverse and what that might mean for NFT artists or those experimenting with blockchain.
I just wanted to jump on what John said before and repeat what I heard on Friday morning at one of the panel. It was really cool. They said, we are at Basel right now, and people were saying, like, why should I hold an art piece in a wallet digitally somewhere on my phone? And someone said during the discussion, but you know that like 3/4 of the pieces at Art Basel here is going to end up in Geneva in the Port-Franc, and nobody is not going to be on the wall, So at least you have it directly on your phone, and and I think it was a really cool, concept that they say, because people like my friends, a lot of my parents, they don't understand why collecting NFTs, does it mean, because you cannot hanging on your wall. But it's the same with those pieces, at Art Basel, actually.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but we can stay here and have a discussion all together. Michel, John, Sébastien, Joanie, thank you so much. We need to have these conversations more and more, and we need to act more and more, and that's what we do on a daily basis, and let's do it even more. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for coming, and I'm enormously grateful to have a panel of such exalted status here with me, and Christiane, who is with us remotely. Hello, Christiane.
Hi, everyone.
We're going to be talking about curating digital art and blockchain art, but because I dispute that the separation between digital art and blockchain art, I'm going to go with something slightly more general, which is curation in Web3. Sorry, guys. So I think it's probably worth just staking out that digital art obviously has a very long history, but I think something that happened with the NFT is that the reality of a new market for digital art has created, I think, a feeling that the age before the NFT doesn't exist. And so there's a kind of curious state, which is almost an ahistorical state that we're in sometimes, I feel, which ignores the long heritage of curation of new media, which curators like Christiane and Sabine Himmelsbach have been so central to driving. So I want to pay deference to your work, but I also am very grateful to have Ambar Al-Mokri and Jesse Damiani here, because I do also happen to believe that Web3 demands skill sets that perhaps weren't required previously. And so I want to also engage and tease out some of those details. And I want to start, however, with a provocation, which is that I'd like to suggest that Web3 poses a threat to all mediators, not only curators, but also editors, who aren't seen to be adding value. So I think from my perspective, one of the absolute requirements in Web3, if one is bringing context, is that it has to be adding value. And of course, after the NFT, that value might also principally be financial value. So I think that's my provocation is you know, what kinds of value have curators of digital art always brought, and have those requirements changed since the NFT? And I want to start, if I may, Christiane, with you. I just want to know if you can just introduce yourself and stake out your position on digital art curation after the NFT.
Okay, thanks so much. And I'm sorry I can't be with all of you in person today. I'm Christiane Paul, curator of digital art at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York. I have been the curator for digital art there for 22 years. I'm also a professor of media studies at the New School in New York. So it's a very good question and very good curation. So I want to start by basically laying out some groundwork and making some distinctions. Curation always means not only selecting works, but also creating narratives in space. And there definitely have been changes to that in the Web3 environment. I think I can speak for all of us curators of digital art that we have always been engaged with creating contextualization. So contextualizing digital art has always been a huge challenge for us within the fine arts world per se, and something we have been doing for a long time. Granted, Web3 and NFTs really heighten the stakes when it comes to that. We once again have to remind people that digital art has a 60-year-long history, that it consists of much, much more than JPEGs and little animated clips, etc. So I don't see Web3 as a threat. It's a continuation of curatorial challenges we have faced for a long time. I know we will get a little bit more deeply into that, but I also want to draw the connection to the Web 2 environment of the 90s, which equally posed challenges, where everybody asked, well, now we have this whole massive online space of people posting their work. Where's value here? How do you assess that kind of value? And Web 2 was a way more fluctuating environment than Web 3, which has fairly static framework in the blockchain. A lot to be said for that. So good thing about Web 3, I would say, is that it has brought more attention to digital art per se through the financialization. Downside being that many people misunderstand what digital art actually is and means, and we have to provide that contextualization. That's just as a brief start.
Perfect, thank you so much. Sabine, I'll ask the same question of you. Can you stake out your position on curating new media after the NFT? And I wonder, just based on what Christiane's been saying, whether anything fundamental has changed with the financialization of digital art.
No, I totally agree with what Christiane just said. I remember being involved as producer and co-curator of the show called Net Condition in 1999, which was a big exhibition at the CKM Center for Art and Media in Karlsruhe, and a show that brought net art into the museum. And I remember how it was very critically reflected. Some artists were showing up and saying, now net art is dead because it's ending up in the museum, and it actually set out to leave the museum behind. And I see, you know, there's also a lot of talk about the curators as gatekeepers, and I see it from a very different perspective, because I see myself as a facilitator, as Christiane said, to put a red thread and navigate that space that is out there, and maybe highlight things that are interesting. And then, of course, also at HEK, House of Electronic Arts, that I'm directing in Basel, Switzerland, to make the audience understand what they are seeing. Today we also talked about generative art. And sometimes the visitors in the space, they don't understand. They think that they are seeing a video. And so very much we as curators are contextualizing and are really facilitating and helping people to understand actually what they are seeing. And now with the Web3 space, I think it's, for me, it kept the same. Since a couple of years, we are commissioning works that are not played out in the physical space in Basel, but on our socials, on our website. And now we integrate the Web3 projects that we are facilitating. For example, 2 NFTs that we have bought for our collection are now together with early works of net art in a virtual exhibition space that is actually based on the programming of Constant Dullard and his concept of the common garden, which is also a social space. And so again, we try to make the narrative from early net art, also the critiques and the hopes of the early web that were addressed in these works, and to see what Web3 is doing and how we are interacting there.
Thank you. I want to bring in Amber from Refraction DAO, which, so far as I understand it, seems to me to encapsulate the principles of Web3 curation. I'm just listing what I've read. The DAO reinvests resources within the structure for new projects. It operates online and IRL. It is a global network designed to support underserved creator communities. So I'd love to hear your perspective as what I would call a natively Web3 curator.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Amber. So Refraction DAO organizes events. We do drops as well. And for us, curation is really at the core of our activities. And I think what Web3 allows is this fluidity between just curators before, but now artists can curate, writers can curate, and this fluidity is very important in bringing new types of experiences, might they be online or IRL. And you mentioned the program that we have. I think Web3 allows more diversity and inclusivity, or at least if you go and look for it, and that's why we try to do at Refraction.
Perfect, thank you. Jesse Damiani, you are responsible for curating maybe the first physical show of work, crypto art. To be honest, I want to start there and just hear how you got your head around doing that, because there are a lot of firsts in this space, but that's quite an important first as far as curation is concerned.
Yeah, so with that show, it was the first retrospective specifically around NFTs in a museum context. And it's funny to think about it now because, of course, that breathless speed of 2021, I think there's still some of it now too, but the idea that show came together, essentially Alfred Weidinger, who's kind of this mad genius, has this idea, and 3 months later we have a physical show. It was the velocity, it's kind of like the form was the function and vice versa. But with NFTs in particular, it leaned heavily into crypto art because the social movement and the social idea of NFTs inevitably grew out of crypto art, though I do distinguish those things. But so when thinking about how do you put together a retrospective for something that most people just found out about, that by its oldest measurement at that time was 7 years old, and that is a technology that hammocks art and any other type of collectible or digital object. So, and also acknowledging that whatever I do, I have to treat as a sort of something I'm offering up into this sort of historical record, but it would be foolhardy to assume that it's even a fraction of the actual history that deserves to be on display in a context like that. Both that I could have found at that time and things that I couldn't have even known to find, because we're watching the ways that, with what Judy Mam is doing, historical NFTs are sort of starting to emerge from the shadows anyway. So I preface all that to say the tack that I took and the sort of context that I wanted to provide was, okay, rather than looking at NFTs as a technology and sort of really hammering what they do, I want to take a look, what they are, I want to take a look at what they do. And what are the threads historically that reference NFTs before NFTs were a technology? So that's why we sort of vectored back to Herbert Franke and sort of invoking computer art. And that's why we vectored back to Lynn Hirschman-Leeson and ideas of cyborg identities and sort of being able to represent oneself in a quasi-commercial context as a brand. So things like that, Namjoon Paik and thinking about this era of ubiquitous connectivity, all of those pieces are part of the puzzle, even though we wouldn't normally situate that in historical context for NFTs if we were just looking at what the NFTs do as a technology. And so then kind of moving through the chapters, it became a question of, okay, well, what are the signposts that I think then offer up a conversation? Again, not trying to say other people have to adopt these chapters, but how do we situate what was happening that involves art, but also involves people who would never identify as artists? And so the signposts that I kind of drew there were the Bitcoin white paper and the immediate wave of interest among artists in the immediate aftermath of the Bitcoin white paper. And then following that was the rise of the marketplaces. So the fact that we had, NFT marketplaces popping up in such a way that we see this movement from more kind of edge-based and sort of experimental practices in crypto art toward streamlining into a containable, as Christiana was saying, JPEGs and loops. So you have the marketplaces that really sort of create that function. And then the metaverse obviously became this huge conversation. So for the final chapter, what we gestured out to is there's stuff happening now that's gesturing about something that's coming, which is artists that are sort of thinking about what it means to be in this metaversal context that I include augmented reality in. I know that that's a controversial thing, but thinking about folks who are wanting to make sense of what's coming with as we become an increasingly digital species, and what's the role of the artist in that. So that was the sort of big, broad strokes, and inevitably, if I curated that today, I would include, as I said, like 10 times more than what I was even able to include at the time. But connected to the metaverse piece, the final thing I'll say is, the other way in which Alfred, I think, was really visionary in that moment is he wanted to have an actual expression in the metaverse. And so there's actually a digital Francisco Carolinum in CryptoVoxels. And what a lot of people don't realize when you first say that is that it actually has the time sensitivity of a physical exhibition because it is on the Ethereum blockchain. And so while that exhibition was up, you had to go see it, and when it came down, it was down. And there was you can't just sort of like drag and drop and copy paste and put that somewhere else. And so that was where we were able to also include a lot of NFTs so that we could make a lot more space in the museum for the physical work that really does take up a lot of the space, and then put the more digital native work. There was digital native work in the museum, but of course we then had another 50 or so pieces that we were able to display in the physical museum. And we also had portals into that digital Francisco Carolinum on site through machines throughout the space. So, long answer. Sorry.
No, that's great. It's extremely helpful to have an introduction. And I think, if I may, I think one of the continuities between what you and Anbar speak about in Web3 is, if not the birth, then certainly the growth of a hybrid creator. Not only that, the development of increasingly hybrid museological practices. And
I would actually, I'm sorry to interrupt,
Please
but
do.
I would actually counter that. I must say I do not quite agree with that. I think that hybridity has existed before. Web 2 equally saw many writers and artists as curators. It was basically the same dialogue surrounding those practices. And the hybridity of physical and online space has also existed for a long, long time in the creation of digital art. I would say they have all, with the advent of what is called post-digital, post-internet, which was a return to materiality, so works deeply informed and created through digital technologies, but often taking physical form. So that was, I think, a major shift in this dialogue between online and offline spaces. So once again, I think we're talking about fundamental conditions that have existed for decades, but a pronounced shift in them through all of what Anbar and Jesse outlined.
Sabine, would you like to come in there?
Yes, I agree. I mean, I have worked with digital arts since the mid-90s. And again, it always was also the, how to bring these works into the physical space. For example, the net art show that I mentioned, is it okay to do that? And then of course there were several works that have been hybrid in a way that they had physical elements and web elements attached to them. I think that, and it's been mentioned again today before, and Christiane also mentioned it, with COVID, there's a new focus on digital arts, that it's talked more about it. And what I see important, for example, directing an institution, is to really tell the history and make those connections, that these works have been around and artists have been working on the web since it existed, because artists are always curious and are always challenging our realities. And for me, Web3 is interesting because I think it's a historical moment where the web is changing. And I question also our role as an institution, how we can adapt to it. So for example, we are also, it's going to be an experiment, I hope it works out. So for HEK, we want to establish a HEK DAO, So to reach out to a new community and not also reach out, but have them, being part of the creative process of what's happening. So that, for me, is a very interesting part.
I just want to stay with you, if I may. I want to just touch on your. You contributed to a book called Eco-Media, Ecological Strategies in Art, back in 2007. And we hear a lot in Web3 about the idea of a new ecosystem. And I sometimes think that comes across rather lazy language. But I think a lot of people regard this sort of digital physical cross as something that is increasingly tangible in their lives, if not always haptic. And I just wonder, following the Ethereum merge, how you regard the state of the digital art ecosystem right now as a media ecology.
I mean, for us, it was super important. We were we are also a museum, and collecting, you don't have to be rushing in. But I mentioned that our collection focuses on software and net-based artistic practice, because I realized we are limited to collect Swiss media art. A lot of Swiss art is in collections, public and private, but what's not collected is really those works that live on the web and so on, with all the difficulties that come with it to preserve it. I cannot guarantee. Some of the early net artworks that we have in the collection are sort of half ruins, but I think that the museums have to take on that challenges and have to find ways how to conserve them, how to document them, and so on. But I think I got sidetracked to what you were actually asking.
I was wanting just to know your thoughts on life after the merge, after a greener Web3.
Yeah, exactly. No, what I wanted to mention is that for us, moving into the Web3 space and commissioning and acquiring NFTs, it was super important that it is with a green blockchain technology. As you said, we did Eco Visionaries in 2007. Right now, we have a show that's titled Earthbound in Dialogue with Nature, where we look at technologies that might help us to better connect with the more than human world and with the environment. So I cannot do that, and in the digital do not care. So the only works we have acquired are based on the Tezos blockchain, for example. Now it is changing, of course. I will see, we are also a bit following the artists, But of course, from our side as a museum, always the environmental issue is a key one.
Same to you, Amber. Just wondering your reaction to life after the merge.
I think, like you, we go where the artists are. It was definitely a subject. Again, we can't be blind to these things. But we are platform agnostic, but most of the artists that we work with work on Tezos as well. We looked at the merge super closely, and we'll wait to see what happens. But for sure, it is a huge subject for us and the future generations as well.
Do you have any thoughts, Jesse?
The one thing I'll add is I just think after the merge, I actually think things get much more interesting, because we're no longer dealing with the 600-pound gorilla of the carbon question with blockchain, and it opens up to what are the relative competitive advantages among the leading blockchains on which you can mint NFTs. And I now think it's a much more equitable in a broad sense. Not obviously, there's still many problems in blockchain from a financial standpoint, but it's much more equitable in the sense that because that question was such a conversation ender, it disallowed people to kind of look into some of the other considerations, and I'm optimistic that in the aftermath, that will be more what artists are taking a look at when they're choosing to mint work or not.
I mean, one of the things that struck me this year in not the first, but the latest crypto crash has been it's offered a chance for, dare I say, folks like us to show the value that we can bring whether that's in providing context, situating complex practices in historical continuum. And I just want to ask, perhaps Christiane, you can come here, whether you feel anything differently this year after the hype has died down, at a time when we're still here. You know, we're still working and we're still trying to build narratives that consider the NFT as more than a financial vehicle.
Absolutely. As many other curators, I've actually been waiting for the crash, and many of us saw it as unavoidable. And it really hasn't changed artistic practice per se, because the people invested in this space are invested in it not because they want to make some fast money, but because they love the medium and are attracted to that. And I think the crash has brought a lot more attention to artists really using the blockchain and NFTs as a medium, rather than just hanging JPEGs on it, but really exploring the space and what you can do with the space, what it has to offer. And people seem to pay more attention to that overall. I also found it very interesting that generative art has received so much more attention through the blockchain. It has generated a whole new discussion surrounding that area of practice. And of course, that area of practice is literally centuries old, and generative art has played a major role in software art over the decades. But I think NFTs have brought a lot of attention to it again. And that is the kind of value that we see addressed a lot more after the crash.
Thank you. I want to stay with you, if I may. Christiane, you wrote a wonderful book, New Media in the White Cube and Beyond, and in which you introduced the concept of new media as a forum which evades definitions. And of course, from a personal perspective, I'm very, very interested in how we choose to define things and how we categorize things. You also reimagined, in my view, you reimagined the curator as a producer, interpreter, and, to quote Sabine, a facilitator of the public's participation in media works. I have to say, one thing I do feel has changed recently is an increasing rejection of digital art and art in general as an anthropocentric phenomenon. And when thinking of the developments currently going on in generative art, one of the things that the artists are often talking about is the parity between the non-human machine and the more than human natural, to the point where it does make me feel like generative art is an art form for a post-anthropocentric vision of digital art. And I just wonder whether you feel that, and if you can give a bit more detail on how curatorial strategies have changed since you published that book.
Well, I absolutely agree with you in terms of the emphasis on the post-anthropocentric. And I think that is also brought about by AI in general. Putting that into perspective, people, theorists, artists such as Alex McLean and others would have argued in the 90s, there is no such thing as randomness in programming or as the machine having control, because we're still setting the parameters to start off. And that is still very much true, even if you look at AI and the data sets it's being trained on. But I think we're seeing a shift of a discourse onto this human machine beyond human collaboration. I also want to mention James Brittle's last book in that context, which is an excellent investigation of it. And artists, of course, also since the 1960s have examined this man-machine collaboration. I'm thinking specifically of Harold Cohen and Aaron in that context, this ongoing discourse about how to collaborate with the machine. And so I believe that in terms of your question, there definitely is a shift of emphasis and a renewed investigation of how this human-machine collaboration plays out, which I find very interesting. So I would say not a complete change in curatorial approaches, etc., but a renewed dialogue about how these constellations play out.
Thank you very much. Sabine, I want to also bring you in here and just to hear your thoughts on that, whether you've seen a shift in approaches.
I mean, I agree with the impact of AI. We did a show in 2018, one of the first AI and artists kind of collaborations and using it as a creative tool. And since then, I think we had not one show where we didn't have an artwork that was using AI. And I mean, it poses the questions, right? I mean, technologies are not neutral, never. It's how we use them. And as James Bridle, that Christiane quoted, says in his book, we can use AI to drill the last drop of oil out of the earth, but we can also use it, for example, to know more about bird migration and then react to that, in that we, for example, change the flight routes to have no crashes with swarms of birds. So, and also curatorially in that exhibition, we made an experiment. We asked one artist group to curate an algorithm that would do the scenography for the show. Of course, I didn't believe in it. And but what happened was that it came up with a very interesting solution of fragmenting everything, every wall that we had. We did not do that, but it was so inspiring, you know, and that's kind of like this together, something else happens, what I find interesting in that field.
Thank you. Jesse, I want to come to you if I may, because I think your work does continue this thread. And I wonder if you could just introduce the concept of post-reality and how it informs your approach to curation.
So I use this term post-reality as a means of referencing not just the ways in which, like oftentimes when people hear post-reality, what they think of is the ways in which synthetic media, so like deepfakes, are used to, or disinformation ecosystems and sort of social media are used to attack a notion of a sort of monolithic truth. That's definitely part of a very small part of what I'm thinking about when I'm talking about post-reality. What I'm talking about with post-reality is a historical context and paradigm, because why I call the past era reality actually has to do with etymology. We didn't actually use the word reality to mean what it means today until the 1540s. And that comes on the back of the things that we associate with modernity, but that comprises things that we now call the Enlightenment, the Scientific Revolution, and culminating in the Industrial Revolution and the wave of colonialization that sort of spread from this sort of reality context. And so what that puts forward is this idea that there is a single monolithic reality. And of course, there are people who are more valuable within that monolithic reality. And we think of the steam engine as this symbolic object that sort of precipitates the either the beginning or the end, or the beginning of the end, depending on how, like, where we're situating historically. So when I'm talking about post-reality, I'm kind of viewing the computer in a similar light, which is that it's this convergent object that isn't the sum of everything, but symbolizes the ways in which the inability to any longer put forward a monolithic reality. That now we've created these communication tools that start with mass broadcast, but ultimately get to a point where any individual from an existential risk scenario sort of thinking, a game theoretic scenario, any individual person now has a far greater capacity to create or destroy reality than ever before in history, unless you are a very particular person in that past context. So when I'm thinking about that and the ways that artists are sort of in a context of post-reality, much of what comes up actually is James Bridle's work and sort of thinking about planetary intelligence and how do we use our tools to essentially undo, to decenter ourselves while still remaining stewards. Because there is this, and this dynamic in decentralization as well. You can't immediately jump to full decentralization and expect that to work necessarily. Versus creating a context where we begin to realize through this multiplicity of narrative that's emerging all over the globe from both humans and non-humans, the ways in which we can facilitate this better world that's a regenerative world that sort of taps into all these buzzwords. But I think core to that actually is another post, and I use these words almost like Trojan horses to some better idea where we don't use post anymore. But the way that the post-growth discourse is really beginning to take off. I think that core to what we face is we actually need to create the incentives to live in a context where growth and what comes with growth is extraction are not the principal means by which value is expressed. If we can arrive at that scenario, we might stand a chance of continuing to inhabit this planet in 100 years. So that being the case, there are all these different ways in which artists are expressing those realities that are in some ways below the surface or sort of hard or sort of inscrutable. But when I sense that, that's where I start to get really excited. And so I kind of intuitively follow that. And I should say, I don't sort of tyrannically curate from within a post-reality context, because sometimes you do something that sort of sits a little bit off to the left and is more of a fascinoma or, whatever. But the things that are really drawing me are things that get me excited thinking about how, we might continue to inhabit this planet.
I think I'm grateful for your answer, because I think, very conscious of Christiane and Sabine, in particular, your work over such a long period in driving this discourse. I think the reason that I am personally preoccupied with Web3 curation is partly because I feel that we're still at the relatively early stage of a new tech paradigm. And of course, based on what Jesse said, of course, every new tech paradigm seems to offer solutions to old problems, but of course, in many respects, often is weaponized to reiterate old hierarchical, neo-colonial, neoliberal structures. So I'm particularly preoccupied right now because I feel like there is an opportunity to kind of wrest control of this set of technologies. And when I'm talking about technologies in Web3, I'm principally thinking of the blockchain, NFTs, and smart contracts, which sort of threaten to automate the future based on the present, as far as I'm concerned. So I have a lot of fear about the potential impact of these technologies. I also feel huge optimism. I mean, this wonderful Thai duo just won the Lumen Prize Gold Award, Elek Leka, whose work seeks to decolonize music, but by reminding us that actually the way in which music is musical notation is so inflected by Western notions of pitch and so forth. So I do feel like at least the early Web3 conversation has the right ethical spirit and the right plural epistemology. But I do want to come back to Ambar, because I think it's really important that structures like Refraction DAO are able to produce progressive plural communities that can succeed, as I fear we see the traditional mainstream contemporary art world trying to perhaps reimpose some of the more vertical, hierarchical, hegemonic structures onto this principally decentralized plane.
Yeah, okay, there's multiple levels to this. First of all, we're also happy that the hype is done, because now we can take a step back and actually think critically about what we want to do. And that's where we started thinking about, okay, what does Web3 mean for North Africa? What does Web3 mean for Latin America? What do people there do with it? That the use of these tools are not the same everywhere. The accessibility is a huge problem. Onboarding is a huge problem. Education is a huge problem. So we can tackle it on our own, of course. We're partnering with amazing people to think about these and just start these conversations and go and ask questions. Like, hey, how do you use this? How is this a new source of money for you? I'm talking about artists, of course. And yes, that's really important to us. And of course, we do have a diverse team, and we're going and meeting the people where they are. But it's like a long-term work. And I think that these discussions are very, very important. It's great to think about Web3 as a technology and a tool, but then what does it mean for everyone?
Sabine, I wonder if I can ask from your perspective, from within an institution, how a potentially progressive and inclusive frame might be emerging, or what it needs to reject in order to emerge.
I mean, for us, I can just agree with what you just said. For us as a museum, it's also important to help people onboarding and to help understand. You know, it's a bit more complex than just using a browser. And we always say, like, everybody knows it, but the reality, it's not. People are really shying away, and then we try to really have offerings for a larger public to get involved. Not that we want to push it, but just for them to can decide, you know, if they want to be part of these new ecosystems. And I think that is important, because I believe, you know, something new is developing, and it's open what it will be. And I think as cultural institutions, we should take the chance to co-shape it. You know, I think that's a challenge and a chance that we have at the moment.
Thank you. Christian, we're coming towards the end here, but I'm desperate to hear your perspective on something which has been bugging me for a while, which is the use of NFTs within a institutional context. NFTs, I'm just thinking, just because it's off the top of my head, of the British Museum, using NFTs to engage audiences, to give a viewing public a new kind of engagement with publicly owned heritage. I'm interested to hear your view, because I've not read or heard this from you yet, whether you feel there are useful ways for NFTs and tokenization to help bring new generations into the world of digital art, but principally the institutionally inscribed world.
Absolutely. I think we have seen quite a few failed attempts of basically just creating JPEGs of the collection and selling them. And that's mostly a work, of course, that's out of copyright. But in general, I see huge potential. We have at the Whitney Museum a working group. I also organized a roundtable with artists where we have been talking about precisely those issues. How can we meaningfully enhance the collection and the understanding of a collection through NFTs and artists' work within that context? So I think we're just at the beginning of figuring that out, how social tokens can relate to membership, how we can go beyond the simple mechanisms of attend the museum 10 times and your social token pass will unlock this or that. So once again, I see huge potential. I would also, coming back to your previous question, say that with every new technology, we have high hopes for decentralization. That was the case with video. That was the case with the web. That is the case for Web3. And we always have to make sure to resist the corporate hype and to find structures that really allow for that decentralization. In the end, it's not institutions, I think, necessarily that will create hierarchies and top-down systems, but it is largely also the monetary system and the players within that system that control the space. Let's not pretend that we have the control over the financial systems and the architectures per se. So I would also love to see more diversification of blockchains. It was interesting to hear from the artists in that roundtable that I organized that there were the ones who practically were engaged with blockchain saying, oh, do not create your own blockchain, and others actually saying, oh, I would love the Whitney Museum to have its own blockchain, you know, and engage with artists that way. So that just as anecdotally one point of how we need to push for, play with diversification and new models.
Thanks very much. And I think finally, before we finish, Sabine, I think I'd just love to hear your thoughts on any perhaps lingering problems that you foresee with the financialization of digital assets as far as institutions are concerned, and whether you also see tokens as a potentially interesting way of pooling cultural value.
I definitely see tokens, in that respect. That's why we also want to move forward in establishing this HackDAO, to use it as a, but going beyond what Christiane just said, but to really create something meaningful where we can interact with our community more and better, and find ways to support artists also through that mechanisms.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Christiane. I want to thank all of our panel today. Christiane Paul, Sabine Himmelsbach, Anbar El Mokri, and Jesse Damiani. It's been a lesson, and I've been very privileged to talk with you. And thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to everyone.